Hi, everybody. I'm Bob Bowman, Editor-in-Chief of SupplyChainBrain, and I want to welcome you to this special presentation on ASRS, not just for retail anymore, presented by Tecsys. Quick reminder, there will be an audience question and answer session at the end of this presentation. Audience members are encouraged to submit their questions at any time during the presentation by clicking on that Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. Now, operations and warehouse leaders are under pressure to tackle labor shortages, reduce costs, and maximize asset utilization. Automating with ASRS, or Automated Storage and Retrieval Systems, can be a game changer, yet many have falsely assumed that it's only for e-commerce and retail. In this webinar today, experts from Tecsys, EXOTEC, and Sedlak debunk this myth to reveal how integrating advanced systems can transform industrial distribution. We'll explore the benefits of ASRS, discover how to implement it, and get tips for transitioning from legacy systems. With that, I want to introduce our speakers for today. Kedar Mohammed is Director, Solutions Architect, and Strategic Initiatives with Tecsys. Kedar has more than 15 years of experience leading multidisciplinary IT projects. His expertise spans the management of complex IT projects, driving organizational change, and delivering high-quality IT services. John Jackson is Senior Sales Executive with EXOTEC. John leads EXOTEC's expansion into the North American market, driving the adoption of the company's robotic solutions. With over 15 years of experience in material handling and guiding large enterprises towards seamless integration of innovative supply chain solutions. And Dave Teeple is Director of Client Services with Sedlak. Dave has over 30 years of management consulting experience in the retail, direct-to-consumer, manufacturing, wholesale, and third-party logistics channels. His expertise in supply chain and logistics has helped companies to drive growth by leveraging technologies that enable supply chain processes and strike a balance between immediate benefits and lasting transformation. Gentlemen, welcome to all of you. Great to have you here. I'm going to start with the panel portion of our presentation with a question for John. Kind of set the table for us here, John. Automated storage and retrieval systems, ASRS, like the ones that EXOTEC offers, seem to have made their mark in the retail, e-commerce, and grocery sectors. Are we starting to see a new use case emerging for them?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Bob. The answer is yes, we are. So some examples will be in the healthcare industry. Their needs are strict tracking and accuracy for the various medical devices and products that are needed for patients. So that means lot control, less human error, and it needs to be fast. So it lends itself very well to ASRS automation. Another would be aerospace. We are in the midst of a large deal with one of the big players over in Europe. They care quite a lot about cybersecurity. So the ASRS technology groups and WMS groups have had to do quite a lot to up their game in the cybersecurity world. So that means like ISO 27001 certification, SOC 2 compliance here in the United States. Very important to those folks. Another that's a bit more surprising is manufacturing. It's no longer a world of just aftermarket parts for big automakers. We are seeing them handling more of their work in progress or WIP portions of their manufacturing with ASRS. Delivering just in time is very important. And so part of that automated buffer that's going to help with a lot of the labor problems can also kind of alleviate some of that pressure along the manufacturing line.
So maybe if I can jump in here, Bob. Sorry.
Go ahead, Dave. Go ahead, please.
So I think it's important to note that, beyond just kind of picking parts and orders, along that same line, John, looking at, various support functions in the manufacturing process, not only, finished goods, but raw material storage, being able to deliver that to the production line, as well as, storing of production tools and service parts. So there's a number of different use cases that have come up, beyond just what we would normally think of in a warehousing environment.
So
Absolutely.
so the idea, the whole notion of automated storage and retrieval, it just sounds like it's essentially vertical agnostic, which is good to know that this particular technology can be applied in so many different places. So Dave, I'm wondering though, what are some of the factors that are actually driving warehouse leaders to automation in the first place? And I assume labor is an issue?
Labor is by far and away the biggest issue these days. Back in the day, we used to have what we called gasoline wars, where literally stations across the street from each other would battle back and forth for who had the lowest price. And these days, it's more of a labor war. So you see all sorts of signs from different distributors, looking to try and competitively go after a shrinking labor market. Wages and benefits have been another key factor, because again, that labor shortage, that's put pressure on wages and benefits. So the employers have had to be very creative to attract and retain talent. One of the other things is that, business leaders are understanding that there is a very strong impact to the bottom line when you look at your fulfillment and distribution costs. So paying attention to those can help you really drive, business improvement and business presence in the business market with Wall Street. So that we're looking at EBITDA and making sure that's a positive impact. So many leaders are looking at the supply chain because of that. John mentioned safety. Safety factors in warehousing and distribution is important, particularly in the industrial sector. And then also factors like eliminating errors, making sure that you've got accurate inventory. It's not just increased warehouse productivity. There's all these factors that come into play.
And there's all kinds of skilled labor jobs out there that people really would like to have. They may go back and get a little bit of training and get a very high paid, well-benefited position. And these jobs are some of the least desirable jobs in the market right now. And so they're not very sought after, and they're going to go for something else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
good point.
I hear the warehouse across the street is offering $1 more per hour, and everybody floods over there. You certainly don't want that to be the case. So, Kedar, from your experience of implementing warehouse management systems or WMS, do you have any use cases of ASRS being used outside traditional industries, for example, in B2B? Kedar, you are muted. If you could come on.
Sorry.
There you
yes,
go. Thank you very much.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. We have use cases in B2B, especially in the manufacturing space. Now, Tecsys does business with manufacturing line in automotive parts, in the car assembly lines. Okay. And we have seen them initially hesitate to implement ASRS, but then when they implemented ASRS, what they started to notice is they were using more space, or they were using the same space, but more densely and providing more stocks for the assembly line. What this meant for them is now they have to replenish the assembly lines less frequently, make use of the same amount of space, but stock more inventory. Okay, now this is common across almost all manufacturing projects that we have done. The other industry that we started to notice, and I want to elaborate on what John and Dave both said, like the labor is absolutely a critical factor in the warehousing space. Okay, if they get $1 more, they are jumping onto the new warehouse right next to the street. Okay, now what it means from a WMS point of view is if I were to hire a new resource to work in the warehouse, then I need to spend time ramping up on training them on the new WMS software. Okay, now the introduction of ASRS systems have significantly reduced that onboarding time. And this is going to take a positive spin across 3PLs, manufacturing, and almost all industries besides what we traditionally have seen in the ASRS space.
But I'd have to think that training on an ASRS would be involved as well. You're just saying that it's so easy that it's on minimal requirements. What's the deal?
Yes, yes. So in a traditional setting, if they were only to use a WMS system, then they will have to follow, let's say, 10 steps to execute a transaction. However, if they end up using an ASRS system, then they are not going to be 10 steps. Maybe they are only 3 steps, okay, just to give an example. So they are less number of clicks that a user needs to perform to execute a transaction with an ASRS system, as opposed to having to do it all manually within a WMS system.
Dave, looked like you were going to chime in there for a moment. Did you have more to say about that?
Yeah, no, I think it's important to note that, more traditional warehouse systems were based on RF devices, which were teeny tiny screens. There was a lot of transactions that you had to do, that you had to learn what each of the functions of the buttons was. You sometimes had to back out of a function to be able to make it work. The new systems, the HMIs, the human machine interface that is provided with these new ASRs are a lot more intuitive and easier to read. And not that it doesn't take training, but it is more intuitive and easier to train it, reduce training time involved with that.
Yeah. John, describe for me, if you can, how an ASRS like EXOTEC might work with the use case that Kadar just described.
Yeah, so I think the onboarding process and the type of worker that you want to have is one that can be trained up easily, quickly. If you could have the HMI in their native language, things like this, and anything that you can automate, like for the healthcare example. If you're doing tight lock controls and you're particular in what serial number gets used and transferred and recorded, it's way better to automate that kind of thing for the operator versus relying on them to do something like this. So it's super important, because the next day it could be somebody's surgery, right? These hospitals don't have hips and knees kind of laying around, even though the hospital may be the point of sale. The inventory resides with humans making decisions. And so if you are going to automate any of that, the better off you're going to be. In a very similar way, we work with Airbus for their helicopters over in France. And so these are the same kind of rules and desirability features that you're going to want to implement. It's kind of like a patient at the end of it, right? Where you're making sure that these critical components are handled with as much automation as possible to ensure their accuracy and speed of delivery.
Dave, what exactly is the role of a person, of a human being, in an ASRS environment? How do you see traditional warehouse labor working alongside the machine in an industrial environment?
So everybody is very adverse to change. So it does take a strong change management process. We mentioned training a couple of times. I think that's hugely important to make sure people are trained in how to not only handle the regular functions, but the exceptions. A lot of times it's the exceptions that frustrate associates when they're working with ASRS or even any type of automation. So, getting them understanding the use case, understand kind of what's, best case scenario, what's worst case scenario, so they understand how to comfortably work in it. But what we've seen, though, once people start to feel comfortable with it, they really become comfortable with the process and the systems. They really like the systems. We mentioned earlier that warehousing environments can be dirty, can be very stressful from a physical point of view. These ASR systems take out travel and allow work to come to that person. So the fatigue factors are improved. The screens and the HMIs that people are working with make it easier to use. So it really becomes, again, if you do this right, it becomes a fairly easy process to get your associates on board and understand the technology and embrace that technology through the operation that they've been doing.
Yeah. I have to wonder if the actual name for the technology is slightly misleading. I mean, automated storage and retrieval. That sounds like no people need it at all. You know, you're automating the whole thing, right? Not that is obviously a misconception, right?
Well, and I think that brings up a great point, Bob. Certainly, we hear a lot about robotics and picking technology. So there are arms that have been around for a long time that have done some of the things that humans do. But now you're incorporating intelligence in the software. You're adding camera technology so you can visually identify objects. I think, the involvement of people is becoming less and less important as the technology grows. But it still adds a kind of a quality factor to have the human involved to be able to kind of make sure that the process functions well and adapt to exceptions and help make sure that it's a quality process.
And we call it a goods to person solution, right? So before it was goods to or person to goods, right? Where the storage and retrieval activity was done by the person. And so that part is automated, and you can do it far more efficiently because the lion's share of the work is in that storage and retrieval activity.
Right. So John, by no means does it means that we are wheeling in ASRS system and wheeling out the people. That is not happening here.
Right.
Right.
Okay, so Kedar, building on Dave's answer to my question about labor and everything else for that matter, how does the WMS fit all these different pieces together? Because there's a complex kind of proposition here.
Absolutely. The way I would like to describe this is a WMS is like the central nervous system for the warehouse. Or the better terminology to use is WMS is going to act like the control tower at any airport. WMS is providing instructions to not just the human resources on the floor, but also to the ASRS. Dave mentioned a very good point about the physical fatigue, but there is another fatigue that nobody talks about, which is the mental fatigue. Okay, so like if the WMS system does not provide clear instructions to the users, then they are wasting a lot of time in thinking what they need to do. Okay, so I say that WMS is that control tower that provides seamless instructions to both humans as well as to all kinds of automation.
Maybe a more sophisticated version than when we saw the early versions of WMS before it went to the cloud and things like that, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
So one other thing, Bob, here is the fact that a WMS is kind of the connectivity to the rest of the operation. WMS kind of oversees and connects all these various systems. And so it's important for an integrated system to be able to function, communicate, so that it becomes a steady flow, not just kind of a complete a task and then wait.
Yeah,
so
sometimes it gets confusing because you have a WCS sometimes, warehouse control system, being integrated as well.
Yeah, so the WCS kind of functions as kind of the direct machine control, whereas the WMS does the kind of the intelligent thinking and again the communications with other systems, so that you have that basically kind of dashboard or control over the system that helps people to interact and again the whole thing to flow hopefully very seamlessly.
Right. So John, regardless of the compelling value proposition that we've been putting forth here about ASRS, investing in such a technology is a major decision for a warehouse leader. What are some of the ways to justify that decision?
Yeah, so we were talking about labor earlier. So often the ROI calculations are pretty clear. You get X amount of savings, and that will justify the business case. That's kind of the easy part. So you need to automate. The tricky part is more of an exercise to understand what's the risk to the downside for any of these ASRS companies or technologies that I'm considering on using. So a thought could be, what's the cost of overbuilding capacity that you don't need today, but you're going to need tomorrow? So how agile is the system at growing over time with me? How confident am I with this technology to shift the risk of expanding in the future down the road and save money today? It might be more of a geopolitical concern that lends itself to the cybersecurity things we're discussing, the long-term supportability and stability of a technology company. You might get it for less capital, but it may be owned by a government that puts you in that risk category, right? So I think the other I can think of is the company innovating? Are they improving on existing technology for small gains here or there? Or is there plenty of room to leverage future innovations that we see coming? So looking to the software element, super important. Can the software of the future play a role in the technology that I'm planning to put in my warehouse?
Dave, what about the ROI? And top executives really want that to be faster than ever before. Can you justify that with an ASRS these days?
So certainly productivity comes into play. I mean, that's kind of the primary thing that most people look at and try and drive the justification off or the ROI off of. But there are a number of factors that we've talked about here through the course of our conversation that I think come into play as well that kind of help support that additional capacity, reduced throughput, reduced labor. John mentioned accuracy. Certainly in the medical field, accuracy is critical. Making sure you're getting the right product, the right quantity. So measuring, what's the cost of an error in the process is important. Also, there is a tremendous amount of pressure these days on visibility of orders. We all tend to talk about Amazon and the Prime effect, but that's resonated throughout, business-to-business models as well. People want to see, where's my order? Where am I in the process? So adding that automation gives you that input onto where it is in the process and can give you visibility that can be given back to the customer, and so they can understand, where it is in the process. And then, safety and security of your workers are other factors as well. What's important? What is the lost time accident cost to your operation when you have to pay for healthcare costs, and again, you're making your staff more comfortable with the automation. So there are a number of factors. Some are soft and some are hard.
And Kedar, I'm wondering, once you have an effective modern day WMS in place, I wonder if that helps to further strengthen the argument for an ASRS to work hand in glove with it. We're talking about how well they integrate. Can you use that argument to say, well, we need this too in order to achieve our goals within this warehouse?
Absolutely. Yes. So that argument helps us, induct an ASRS system along with the optimizations that Tier 1 WMS solution like WMS brings to their operations.
But Dave, I want to back up a little bit more here and ask you from your experience, walk us through the whole process of evaluating whether to automate and what kind of automation to select.
Yeah, that's a great question. It's important to start with, where's your business going? Understanding and establishing a long-term plan. These investments are pretty significant, so it's important to understand, 3 to 5 years, 10 years out, where's the business going? So that drives really the requirements that you're trying to solve for. And then baselining your current operation is kind of the key next step. What are you doing today? What is it costing you? What's your throughput and your capacity? And then, looking at the various options. And as you look at various options, what is important to you? Is it space important? Is throughput important? Is it a combination therein? Because when you look at different ASRSs, they have different characteristics and benefits that they can bring. So you can look at a traditional shuttle system versus kind of a top load ASRS system, versus some of the more flexible systems that are out there AMR wise that you get better throughput, but less space efficiency. So understanding kind of what the benefits are of your technology. What is the labor associated? What's the labor gain? So what does it get me from a parts per hour, pieces per hour, cartons per hour, whatever the key metric is that drives your labor component. Understanding what the investment cost is, and looking again comparing that to your baseline, and looking at that as a long term. And then how are you using that warehouse space? So space, people, and investment all can be drilled down into annualized costs. So you can get a very simple, direct kind of comparison or way to rank technology versus your current process. And then on top of that, then you start to want to have to layer on the intangible things. Is it very complex? Is there a lot of connectivity that's required? Is there a lot of maintenance that's required? What's the adoption level of you think that your associates are going to have with that type of technology? So understanding kind of the intangibles and then the economics really can then help you select what's best for you.
Kedar, give us the WMS perspective of what the implementation of an ASRS looks like. Take me through an overview of the entire process and the associated requirements.
Implementing an ASRS system with WMS involves several steps, and for the simplicity, I would say we can easily categorize those into the 5 W's: the why, the where, the what, the who, and the when. Okay. Now, the why may sound quite rhetoric, but we really need to have the buy-in from all the stakeholders on the necessity to implement the ASRS system along with the WMS software. Okay. Now, once that has been established, the next 4 W's popularly gets translated into a project plan. Okay. So the where is identifying the area in the warehouse where the ASRS system will be implemented and to service which part of the operation. Okay. The what is mostly to understand what needs to be done so that the ASRS system is functional with WMS as well as for the operation. Okay. Now, this what also includes what kind of testing needs to be done, what kind of data that needs to be fed in, what kind of technology being used, what kind of constraints do we have? Do we work around those constraints, or do we work with the provider to help us, meet the new requirements? And once we have identified all the what's, the next step is to identify who is going to do whatever all the tasks that we have identified. Okay, what is important in a software implementation world is we need to identify the right resources to do each of the tasks that were previously identified. Okay, now once we have identified the task, assigned the roles, that requires extensive build, extensive testing, and then the last W is the when. Okay, so we have identified all the steps that needs to be done. We have identified who needs to do all those steps. The last item is when is it appropriate to conduct each of these steps. So once all of those have been done, the results, what we have seen is a fully functional warehouse with little to no errors.
Wow. It is the rare warehouse that does not involve, or that it works exclusively on steady, unchanging volumes. There are peak seasons, there are valleys in demand, there are unusual surges in demand, and the like. So I want to ask all of you how the concept of volumetrics comes into play in implementing an ASRS. Let me start with you, Dave.
Sure. I mean, the volumetrics are important. I mean, it comes down to, one of the key things is, how are you optimizing your labor? So, understanding kind of what is that baseline throughput. One of the challenges you have with any automated system is the fact that, it operates at a, steady state rate. It's not like you can throw labor at it unless you add, additional workstations or, change the design of your ASRS. So understanding kind of how you manage the peaks and valleys of your business. Now, certainly, as we talk about an industrial environment, the peak to average ratio of steady state average volumes versus kind of peak volumes is much lower than kind of a retail wholesale environment that gets really affected very heavily by the holiday season. But it's still, again, important to understand that there are challenges that you have to do. And again, utilization of this equipment is extremely important to getting that ROI. You don't want to have equipment that you bought for the peak day that sits idle, most of the year, or for the average times. So kind of understanding those volumetrics and planning accordingly in your design is extremely important to making sure it's a successful implementation.
John, could you speak to the volumetrics question?
Yeah, so Dave makes an excellent point about asset utilization. Any conveyors, robots, elevators, shuttles, whatever they may be, if they're not moving, then you are not realizing your full ROI potential on your investment, essentially. So you all, I think, know that I'm a robot fan, and so we are able to use that sort of freedom from the infrastructure to really dial that in, make sure that we have only the amount of robots you need. Perhaps it means you would rent some and then send them back. Things like that are becoming more and more frequent as we see these AMR companies like mine get up to speed in these more manufacturing environments.
Kedar, what's your perception on the volumetric side subject?
From a software point of view, volumetrics is as essential as it is essential for any kind of automation. Okay. Now, when we implement WMS, we calculate the networking capacity. Networking capacity helps us, in calculating the space we need to optimize the warehouse from a real estate point of view. Yeah. Networking capacity also helps us in estimating the space we need in the next 5 years, or whatever percentage the company is growing on in an organic fashion year on year. So volumetric is an absolute essential, whether we have an ASRS, whether we have just WMS.
I think that's a great point, Kedar. When these types of systems, again, significant type of investment. So it's very important to have your plans for flexibility and scalability. So making sure that you've got a plan. How can I incrementally add capacity? John talked about, renting robots as a service is certainly a new option that has really helped the ASRS technology, as well as most types of automation, in being a more affordable model, because now with the robots as a service, it becomes less important to invest capital, and it transforms that capital into operating expense that, again, makes it more palatable for businesses to invest in automation. But again, understanding kind of what that long-term plan is and where you're going to make those key investments, and allowing you to flex based on how you do grow inevitably, because your forecasts are really just that, I guess. So sometimes you have to accelerate that investment, and sometimes it allows you to delay that investment. But again, you've got the plan to adapt to whatever happens from a business environment.
I like what Dave said about planning flexibility as part of the plan. That is such a great tool to have. So, for example, the ASRS storage is likely going to be one of the most expensive storage positions in the entire warehouse or manufacturing facility, right? So you could make a decision that says, well, I'm just going to replenish it more often and have a lot of stuff in deep reserve to back that up. And it allows me to make a decision later, potentially. I could always expand the racking of the ASRS later if it's an agile system, especially a robotics one, a robotics-driven ASRS. Then I could add that later on and make a decision later and potentially save myself a lot of money in the process.
Okay, thank you. I'm certainly glad we talked about scalability, because nobody wants to think that they've invested in an expensive system that locks them into a particular level of activity and does not allow them to scale up or down according to the reality of actual demand. At this point, I do want to bring in the audience Q&A portion of our discussion. And audience members, you have already provided some really good questions that I want our panel to address, but feel free, and please do, continue to submit those questions even as we're answering the ones we already have, and we will get to as many of your questions as we can, time permitting. So I'm going to start with this one. Here is what our questioner says. I certainly understand the value of ASRS in B2B, distribution, manufacturing, e-com, and the like. What I do not understand is that with the pressure of shorter and shorter lead times and how to mitigate the risk of technology failure during a pick shift. And here the questioner brings up the idea of a doctor ordering a knee replacement for next day delivery, patients there for surgery, and the knee gets stuck in an ASRS and cannot be retrieved until the technology issue is fixed. John, how do you answer that?
Oh, that's the perfect question for me, because my lovely robots, of course, have a wonderful answer for that.
I thought you were going to say because you had a knee replacement. Okay.
Oh, no, fortunately not yet. So the great thing about using AMRs in an ASRS is you got more than one of them. And we understand the mechatronics of the system to break from time to time. And it's all about when. And it's usually at one of the most inconvenient times. So the nice thing about robots is if one does break, as we've expected, we ask it to leave. And he has a friend to take over and bring said knee out to the order fulfillment container.
Okay, thanks for that. This question, I think maybe I'll direct to Dave. How do you go about understanding the specific outputs and impacts of each solution considered? Additionally, how do you optimize the ultimate solution, then maintain that optimization over time?
That's a very interesting question. So, again, making sure that you have, scope things out correctly, scoped out your use case that allows you to kind of understand kind of the nuances of that will help you, again, handle those kind of situations and allow you to adapt your solution to make sure that you've got the ability to handle those situations. Now, understanding your metrics, we talked a lot about volumetrics and understanding kind of those keys in the volumetrics and what are the drivers of those volumetrics are extremely important because there are various factors that are involved in the solution that are required to make sure that you've got all your bases covered. So.
Okay. This question says, how do distributors profile ASRS from a velocity perspective? Let's try Kadar for that one. Do you understand the question, Kadar?
Yes. In a typical distribution space, the operations are segmented into multiple logical warehouses. Okay. Now, from a volumetric point of view, it is necessary to understand which type of inventory is being pulled, whether it is cases or eaches or pallets. Okay. Now, calculating the the velocity of an item at each level is very different from calculating the velocity of the same item at a pallet level. You may be pulling 1,000 eaches from the same pallet, or you may be pulling one each or one pallet from a location. So I think it is necessary for segmenting the item profiles in a way or in a logical way in the warehouse, so that the velocities are calculated appropriately and the ASRS are used in the most optimal way for each of the designated logical section within the warehouse.
Thank you. Another one, I think I'll ask you this one also, Kedar. How do you overcome black box scenarios where the data is not flowing freely between the WMS and your automation solution?
Very interesting question. This is where the necessity of having a robust APIs are come into play. Okay, so if we are running into issues where the transmission of message is not happening on a quick or in a synchronized fashion, then we need to have a safe proof mechanism that creates an alternative way of sending the message to the various systems or between the systems. So this way, the black box scenario that you described can be easily avoided.
Okay, thank you. All right, this questioner is saying, have any of you worked with a dual technology installation where both ASRS and AMR, autonomous mobile robots, are implemented, where it would be beneficial to utilize both processes to handle inventory or case size configurations, where an AR, or I guess I mean an AMR, would work great for smaller, lighter products. I mean, an ASRS would work great for smaller, lighter products, and AMRs would work better for odd-sized products. Whew, what do you think, John?
Yeah, so we've done some of that integration where, you have often you're going to be decanting into a certain size tote, and these totes are put away for storage, and that's great for each picking. But it may mean that you don't want to keep something in there that's only going to fit like 3 in there, because you're going to be moving them, if the volume is there, just as quickly as you replenish them. So it could make better sense to, from that pallet position even, do the picking there. Have a pallet flow, a carton flow, where the pick density can be increased, and you only have a few operators, say, working that mod that would be able to generate the same kind of outbound order lines as you would at an ASRS pick station. And then you've got the oddballs that can get pretty big. And that could mean that you would have a mini load or something, a more traditional ASRS system, that you would put that in, and it would handle kind of the uglies that wouldn't fit inside of the robotics ASRS. And then also we've done some work where the mobile ASRS is more of the front pick face, if you will, and it's supported by a large reserve inventory that's also automated, like a mini load, and the replenishment happens automatically. And so that is going to benefit you in terms of having to constantly resupply the forward picking engine, and you just do massive replenishment moves on the bigger reserve system that's backing it up. There's a couple of examples.
Maybe if I can jump in here, Bob.
Please do.
I think one other thing that's important, and John, you've probably seen this, is, again, it goes back to that question of what if you get inventory stuck in your ASRS? So a lot of times, the use of an AMR solution, like a cobot solution, allows you to have kind of a secondary operation that mitigates the risk, allows you to have some redundant inventory, maybe at smaller levels, to be able to kind of continue the order process if there is a failure of the automation. The other thing that we've seen, and this is not necessarily just AMRs, but one of the challenges of ASRS is, again, it functions at a steady state rate. So, and really, again, going back to goods to person, John, you brought up earlier, it's important to note that ASRS, and particularly in goods to person, you want to optimize the picks per presentation. So it's important to be able to optimize that, to leverage either some sort of AMR type solution or some sort of sortation type solution where you can pick out of the ASRS and then leverage the sortation automation to really kind of break it down to the order level. That is a great way to add some capacity or horsepower to your automation design.
Great, thank you. The distribution center is the closest point to the customer other than the delivering carrier. Uptime is critical when shipping orders out the door. Any historical data on uptime for ASRS systems? How about you, John, again?
Yeah, so we, like I mentioned before, we deploy systems that have more than one robot that does the job. So it's kind of cheating a little bit, but it means that we get to enjoy a 99.8% uptime average across all of our sites, which is very hard to do in some of the traditional ASRS systems. And so that is something that, over a month's time of deliveries, a customer can come to expect, which is really changing the game.
Great, thank you for that. All right, so I guess here's another question. It says, what types of items would not work in an ASRS setting? Dave, what do you think?
Well, certainly, the big and bulky items don't work well in the traditional AMR, or not AMR, but the goods to person solutions or ASRS solutions. However, I think what we're seeing is some growth in the design. I think the ASRS providers are looking to do some of those outliers, particularly when we talk about manufacturing. Parts that are long or big and bulky. So there are systems that are being developed that we're seeing that become good buffer systems that leverage more of a cantilever rack. So it can go vertical. It can basically take those longer items and fit those in locations and then retrieve them for situations where, again, when your more traditional systems don't handle those very well.
Question is, can an ASRS do case picking? John?
Yes, it can. And so this can be useful, especially if you have an omni-channel operation that you're working in, where you need to move both cases and do each picking, and you can do it with the same system instead of having to develop two of them. And you could also do tricks like open up the top of the case and do each picking right out of that. We use trays to move our cases around and can make the presentations to the operators, presenting the product right inside the case that it came in.
Somewhat related question here. I'm going to direct it to Kadar. How can I manage multiple types of inventory, such as eaches, cases, pallets, at the same time within the WMS?
Managing multiple types of inventory must be at the core of any WMS system. Okay. Now, I say in Tecsys WMS, we offer UOM or unit of measures up to 6 in an incremental fashion. It can start with an each or a piece. It can go to a case or an inner, to a layer or a pallet. Okay. Now, the best of the WMS solutions should be able to classify and segment each type of UOM into its specific category. Okay, we should be able to identify each as an each, a case as a case, a pallet, as an example. Okay? And then it comes the management of the locations within the warehouse. In warehousing terminology, we can say divide the warehouse into multiple logical sections so that each section you can either have mixed inventory, or ideally you can segregate the logical warehouses to have a unique segment of inventory, like eaches and the cases and the pallets. Okay? If you are able to do these two things meticulously well, and then when you introduce an ASRS system or any kind of automation, as a WMS, you now provide very accurate information to these systems, whether it is an AMR, ASRS, or any kind of robotics, including the manual labor. Okay, so there is zero ambiguity there if the segmentation is done like that. Okay, and I would also say that if all of these are done with no errors or with proper logic, then you can up your game in the warehouse to do multiple advanced picking strategies. You can have one order with multiple UOMs of multiple scenarios, and you can have all of those picked at the same time by multiple users. You can have a scenario where you can have multiple orders demanding for multiple different UOMs, and you can pick simultaneously, across all those orders and bring them to a point of consolidation.
Yeah, and I think Kedar touched on something super important about an ASRS is, the data that the WMS provides is crucial. You've heard the expression garbage in, garbage out. But you can only pick out of an ASRS as accurately as you have filled it up. And so that dance in the warehouse that is done by the WMS, super important.
Right. Now, to the naked eye, this questioner asks, it seems like these systems do the same thing in different packaging. What are some of the key differentiators and features to look for when comparing an ASRS? John?
Yeah, that's a good one. I get it a lot. So, and the reason is the customer will say, well, it's moving totes just like all the others. So what's the difference? And so the differentiators I think we touched on are going to be kind of the categories of these tote movers that we see these days. So I'm referring mostly to goods to person. So the top loaders, the cube storage style, the more flexible AMR like a SkyPod system, and then shuttle and mini load. And so among those, they all have sort of different sweet spots. But in my space, the sweet spot that I'm looking for is, do you have a high storage requirement with a lot of SKUs that you also need to get out very quickly, and and your growth and your predictions are a little fuzzy? That is the best place to deploy, let's call it a mobile ASRS system. And so that's kind of the world that I play in, and that's what I'm on the look for.
Well, listen, guys, this has been a fantastic discussion. Unfortunately, I'm the bearer of bad news, and that is we are out of time, except for one final question, and I'm going to direct it to Kedar. Here it is. As supply chain leaders continue to optimize their warehouses with the addition of automation hardware, the question of integration arises. How should they be managing these interfaces for WMS to automation? And what tools and features should they be looking for in their WMS vendor?
So very important question. I say, as supply chain leaders continue to optimize their warehouses with additional automation, they should look for a WMS that is technically savvy, highly scalable, both horizontally and vertically, quick to adopt, and simple to use. I have simple 5 pointers. Look for a robust API capabilities, look for modular architecture, look for scalability, real-time data synchronization, and interface that is easy to use.
Well, again, gentlemen, thank you so much. Kedar Muhammad of Tecsys, John Jackson of EXOTEC, Dave Teeple of Sedlak. There's been a great presentation, very educational, about how an ASRS can actually be used in many more applications than one might have thought before we heard these guys talk. So thanks again, guys, and audience. Thank you very much for your participation and asking your great questions. Here's a little extra for you all. You can access Tecsys' series on warehouse automation. Learn how advanced solutions could drive efficiency in your operations by taking a snapshot of that QR code. If you're unable to do so in these few remaining seconds, don't worry about it. It will be sent to you all attendees of this presentation, as well as that URL down there where you can actually focus and contact Tecsys. So thanks again, everybody. Audience, thank you so much. Have a great day. Take care.
Thanks, Bob.